This is Keys to the Shop, episode 269, What to Focus On After You Launch. Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate you all listening to the show. And if you haven't subscribed to the show, I would encourage you to just hit the subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, I would love it if you'd share these episodes with a friend or with your team. So much great information from our guests on this show. And I think some of these insights would be helpful for others that you know in the industry. Now, this show is brought to you in part by Keys to the Shop Consulting. This is where I get to work directly with you to help you level up your operations, help you expand, help you with projects that you're working on, optimization for your business, or just to get your business started on the right foot if you're opening a coffee bar and you've got a lot of questions. It really runs the gamut. My clients come from all different walks of life and in all different stages of the coffee business. And so whether you're interested in remote consultation or in person, there's a lot of different ways that we can work together. And I would love to talk with you about what that would look like. To have a conversation about working with Keys to the Shop Consulting, just email me at chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS@keystotheshop.com. Now, Keys to the Shop is brought to you by the people supplying you with amazing commercial coffee equipment. That is none other than Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the best in the world at supplying you with espresso machines, grinders, brewers, under-counter refrigeration, the whole shebang, really. And one of the reasons they're so good at this is not just because they curate the best equipment from all over the world, but they also work to match that equipment with your specific needs or your context. And let's face it, when you're opening a business or you're expanding your business, one of the biggest expenses is the equipment itself. And you want to know that the people selling you the equipment are going to be in your corner the whole way. And that is exactly what Prima Coffee does. To let them know that you came from this show, go ahead and visit the website prima-coffee.com/keys. And you can also get 5% off your entire order by using the code KEYS5 at checkout. So a really generous offer using the code KEYS5 at checkout at prima-coffee.com/keys. And if you're in the market for commercial equipment, again, I don't think you can get better than Prima Coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series is a plant-based performance beverage like no other. Pacific has built the Barista Series for baristas and with the feedback of professional baristas across the globe to make sure that it performs on your bar the way you really want a plant-based beverage to perform. Your customers are going to love the fact that it stands up to the heat from the steaming process. Any of the beverages in their extensive line will create amazing texture for latte art, and it will keep the flavor of the beverage focused on the coffee. With plant-based beverages continuing to skyrocket in popularity and outperform milk in many, many cases, you want to serve your customers the best, and I believe that the best out there is Pacific. So go to the website, pacificfoodservice.com, check them out, get it in your store and try it for yourself. If you really want to serve the best, then I think the choice is clearly going to be the Pacific Barista Series. All right. Well, today's episode is going to be focusing on something that is so critical when you're first starting out your coffee bar. And to be honest with you, even if you're already started your coffee bar years into it, these are things that you can still do today, even if you didn't do them right away or focus on them. And that's really the key here, is the idea of focus. Because when you are setting up your coffee bar for the first time, you're operating in a vacuum. There's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of possibilities. You put it on paper, you build out the space, you dream about the menu, the service, you hire the staff, you train. It's all this potential energy. And now that you've started your coffee bar, it feels like running downhill. And it can feel pretty disorienting because all of those potentials are now realities. And it reveals to you that not everything that you planned is going to happen exactly the way that you thought it was going to happen. And that's fine, because nothing ever does. Our plans for our coffee bars, we never actually get exactly what we want. Because, as we've said here many times, coffee bars are co-created spaces. And so you don't have ultimate control over the outcomes here. But what you do have control over is what you focus on and what you make time for, especially if you're in the planning stage now and you're thinking about how you're going to use your time later on in the process once you're open. I think there are a few things that I would encourage you to focus on that will make a big difference for your coffee bar. Of course, we've talked about one of the first things, and that is you have to focus your energy not on trying to get everything to be exactly the way you envisioned it, but somewhat allowing it to take on its own form. A lot of times we sabotage our growth by having a very narrow view of success. So there are little things that you might be upset about not exactly happening the way you wanted them to, but what's the big picture here? How are you going to use your energy, your presence, your power in the right way so that you're not just focused on trying to get everything lined up exactly right, but you're looking at bigger picture things that allow this business to be steered in the right direction while it's finding itself and its legs in this community. So beyond the idea that you have to relinquish a little bit of control when you open up and try to avoid being shell-shocked by the idea that it's not going to look exactly the way you thought it was going to look, is that you have to focus on relationships. Relationships are one of the most important parts of your business. It is the relationship, of course, between you and your staff, building that good trust and the mutuality between you all. But it's also the same for your customers. Trust and mutuality, serving them well. Beyond the doors of your cafe, there are the relationships you have with your vendors and making sure that you have a good working relationship where there's a lot of congeniality, there's a lot of respect, you're paying them on time, all of that stuff, and you're passionately advertising for them. And then there are the relationships that you have with your greater community. There are clubs, there are groups, there are organizations, all the things that make up your town or your city. How aware are they of you? And how generous are you going to be with them in the process of letting them know that you're there? There's a lot of things you can do right from the beginning to announce yourself to them that's not going to come off as a huge sales pitch, but more like, we're here to serve you, and we just wanted to maybe give you these gift cards or this Joe to go of coffee or whatever it is, something generous. You lead with the kind of thing that you want to cultivate. If you want to cultivate community and want to be considered part of the community, you've got to serve and know the community first. And so focusing on how these relationships are going to be nurtured over the long haul is one of the main things that you need to be focused on. And you're not going to do it perfectly, you know? You don't need to get to know everybody in the first week, but if it's a thing that you focus on consistently over time, you're going to see those relationships start to develop into opportunities. When you want to open a second store, the people that are going to find you the location oftentimes are the people that you've made friends with over the years by serving their interests, by developing relationships with them. The people who are going to advertise for you word of mouth are the people that are the most passionate about your brand because you've given so much to them, not just because you've given them latte art or because you've given them a fancy drink, but you gave them an experience based in relationship. I've seen it so often, and especially in 2020. The people who developed amazing relationships with their community are the people who were supported amazingly by their community, and they're still open today because of that, a lot of them. So let this last year and just good common sense be a lesson. Relationships are what we need to be focusing on right from the get-go. The next thing I think we should be focused on is optimization. Your coffee bar needs to run well. And the idea that you need to relinquish control of how this thing looks does not mean that you need to let go of standards. And it certainly doesn't mean that you can't optimize. In fact, I think optimization is probably the number one thing that you need to be focused on even before you open. You need to tell the staff, hey, here is a manual, here is some checklists, and here's some stuff that we're going to use for our benefit. This is a living document because the coffee bar is a living thing. And so the optimization of our opening checklist, our closing checklist, how we make smoothies, how much toilet paper to buy, what the inventory system looks like for coffee beans. All that stuff needs to be on the table in terms of how are we going to optimize this? Who is going to optimize it for you? Well, you need to have feedback from your baristas. You need to see how it's working or not working and then say, hey, remember when we said that these things are not necessarily concrete right now? We're going to tweak this so it works better for you, so that you have better and more clear instructions. And a team that is prepped that way, and you as an owner, when you're prepped that way, it's not going to be a frustrating thing to optimize, which basically is a fancy word for changing things. It's going to be exciting because you know now this thing is going to serve us better, right? We don't serve the checklist. The checklist serves us. Our systems and the things that we do to make the drinks consistently and give this great experience to our customers is based on how well we optimize the things on the back end, the systems, the operations. And so look at little tweaks. Look at places, maybe it's not the best place for the urns. But you can move that. Okay, we can move that. That's great. In fact, the first year is a perfect time to make a ton of changes. People are just like, yeah, we're just getting into the groove of things. We're figuring out how it works best. No amount of pre-planning is going to eliminate the need for optimization. I guarantee it. You can't predict the future. You can do it a little bit. I design coffee bars for people, and there are a lot of problems that we avoid through planning and forecasting what's going to happen. But to 100% accuracy, not a chance. So optimization is one of the things that we constantly need to be focused on, especially in that first year. And then, maybe after year one, you can have something that's pretty solid. In year two, it's even more solid. And after 5 years, I don't even recommend people open 2 locations, a second location, until they're like 4 or 5 years down the road. Because of this, we're still optimizing, we're still solidifying things. So your mind needs to be focused on that. The next thing that we need to focus on kind of goes along with optimization, and that's quality. We want to make sure that what we're producing is not just passable, but that we are raising the level of our worst drink. So your philosophy needs to be, you're only as good as your worst beverage. And if your worst cappuccino is better than everybody else's best cappuccino, you win. That, at least, you win. There's a lot more that goes into a coffee bar, but your goal in quality needs to be to create a system and standard and training and resourcing that allows you to almost effortlessly produce a high quality beverage consistently. This is the goal of a specialty coffee shop. And through a dedication to looking at the little things on the coffee bar, how you're roasting your coffee, how you're dialing in your shots, tasting the batch brew coffee, that's going to get you there over time. But it takes pushing against the desire to sort of take the easy road and say, nobody's going to know because it's a mocha. Nobody is going to know because I don't have time to tweak this, or I'm not going to communicate a problem with espresso with the owner because I feel stressed out. And it takes a group effort, right? So we need to be committed, all of us in this process, the team, the owners, the managers, commit to communication and contribute to the elevation of the standard of our coffee and our beverages and our food. Nothing is just a throwaway. Nothing is just anything, quote unquote, just a mocha, quote unquote, just a bagel, down to how you put the cream cheese in the bag needs to be at least thought of a little bit. Intentionality with everything you do in mass creates a great experience for the customer, and it becomes second nature to you after a while. It might be tedious in the beginning, but as it becomes part of who you are, it just becomes automatic. You don't have to exert as much effort anymore into putting effort into things, if that makes sense. So the quality of what you do and how you do it and the way you think about it will create a differentiation that is unbeatable. Now that leads us to another thing that we need to be concentrating on, and that is culture. I said before that coffee bars are co-created spaces, and that's true. The culture that you see form in your coffee bar is a combination of your vision and values fleshed out through how you behave and take action as an owner and the kind of things that you train them on and communicate to them on. But it's also a combination of your staff and the customers and how they all interact together. So if you think about the Venn diagram of 3 circles intersecting in the center, and where you and your vision and the setup of this business is one circle, the customer and their expectations are another, and your baristas and how they serve those 2 things is the third. Right in the middle is your culture. You have the ability to curate that culture by what you put into that center. Again, you don't have ultimate control, but you do have the ability to curate through means of hiring, communication, setting an example, being a good leader, putting in place service standards that attract certain types of customers, that type of stuff. So your focus on culture is twofold. One, it is observational. You need to be aware of these elements that combined create your culture. 2, you need to realize that you have power to be able to curate some of what happens in that culture. By using the power you have as a boss, you have authority to provide platforms to further the positive elements and push away the negative ones. Putting together a platform for feedback for your baristas is a great way to encourage the growth of trust and vulnerability. Not setting that up and expecting perfection from people is a good way to curate the culture in a negative direction. So you should be looking at how you can work with this process of culture formation as it grows into a certain direction by virtue of how you are providing resource. It's just like plant cultivation. You have the ability to create possibilities, but the plant is growing on its own. You're not sitting there pushing water into it, but you're providing opportunity for growth in a particular direction. This is one of the higher functions as a leader. You are supporting the process. You're not in ultimate control, but you are supporting it and encouraging it in certain directions. So that's another thing that I think you should be focused on. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about here is kind of twofold. It'll come as no surprise that I think in the long term, in terms of success, over time, consistent action-based values will win the day. But when you look out into the landscape of what people are talking about in entrepreneurship, especially in customer service, small business, like coffee shops, you get a feeling of desperation. Everything is sales focused. Everything is about discounts. How do I get people in? How do I get them to buy? And that's a legit question. Like, how do I get them to buy might be a problematic question, though, because we are trying to get people to do something instead of providing something that they want. And they can sense that desperation, and it doesn't look good. When people know that you're offering them a buy one, get one discount just to get them in the door because you're just begging for dollars, it's kind of off-putting. And when you're constantly chasing people through sales and gimmicks and acting out of desperation, what you're telling them is that you are not confident in what you're serving. And why should they be confident in what you're selling? You're already discounting it heavily, right? And they can sense that you're just like throwing this thing out there like a Hail Mary to try to get them in the door. So you sell maybe like 10 more sandwiches on Wednesday. It's a hard road to walk because you do want people to walk in the door and buy more stuff because you need to make money. Now, I get that. But the solution is not some kind of an unhealthy codependency where you come off very clingy, very desperate, and kind of just like, frankly, annoying, not seen as a very valuable thing to people because you're not confident. The focus needs to be on service versus sales. Sales come as a result of serving people's needs and providing something that they ultimately want. If they're not coming to get your sandwiches right now, they don't want your sandwiches. You're not going to get them to buy your sandwiches by making them half off. You need to serve something potentially different. Take another look at what you're doing. This comes back to optimization. Maybe having 17 different flavors on the bar is just too many for people to choose. And you need to have better flavors, less options, a more confident approach to your business. So in the beginning, you've got to resist the temptation to just give the place away. You've got to resist the temptation to come off as really desperate. You've got to resist this because it creates this desperation that's really unattractive to your ideal customers. The customers that you do get by constantly offering discounts and gimmicks and clubs and this, that, and the other thing, It's like, where is your brand? Where's your confidence? Are you actually serving people's desires, or are you just trying to force them against their will to like you? That's desperate, and that doesn't look good for a business. It doesn't look good for a relationship either. And that's what we're focused on. We're focused on developing a relationship. So again, if you find yourself in this position of having to try to force people to come into your store by offering them what they already aren't buying for less money, look a little bit deeper at what we're trying to do. That's to serve people. And I say this again, I know that we need to make money to survive. But I know that oftentimes what this amounts to is trying to dig yourself out of a hole. I mean, obviously it just gets deeper, and we feel like because we're working hard, we should be making progress, but it's just the wrong approach. And so all of these things are, I think, really critical to you being successful in your coffee venture. And I think the overarching principle here in what you should be focusing on after you launch is based on the idea that these things take time. They take intentionality and focus. And when you commit yourself to them, there'll be decisions that don't just get you by temporarily, but will serve the business far into the future and allow for the healthy growth of your customer base and your business. So if you have any questions or comments about this episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, just send an email to me, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's also where you can reach out to inquire about Keys to the Shop consulting. Again, that email, chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that is the end of our episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this episode. I hope that it was insightful and helpful for where you find yourself in coffee. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.